What if I told you that somewhere in your lower leg, there's a muscle so small, so quiet, so utterly unremarkable, that most anatomy textbooks barely give it a second glance? And yet, this muscle might be the single most important defense your body has against the slow damage of modern life. It doesn't make you stronger. It doesn't make you faster. You'll never see it flexed on a magazine cover. You can't even feel it working most of the time. But here's the strange part. When this muscle goes silent, when it stops doing its quiet, almost invisible job, your blood sugar climbs, your cholesterol shifts. Fat begins to settle in places it shouldn't. Your metabolism, the engine that keeps you alive, starts to sputter. And the wild thing? This is happening to you right now. Sitting in your chair, lying on your couch, standing still in line. Anywhere your legs are inactive, even for a few minutes, this muscle is going dark. Scientists at the University of Houston spent over a decade studying it. They called what they discovered an anti-gravity muscle. They called the way it works metabolically unique. Some have gone as far as to say it could rewrite our entire understanding of why sitting is so dangerous to human health. So tonight, we're going to descend into the strangest, most overlooked corner of human anatomy. We're going to meet a muscle you've probably never heard of. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why a single, almost imperceptible motion, something you can do barefoot in your chair right now, might be one of the most powerful health interventions ever discovered. It begins with a question no one was asking and an answer that nobody saw coming. Let's start with something strange. For the last 20 years, public health researchers have been sounding an alarm. They've called sitting the new smoking. Headlines scream that prolonged sitting raises your risk of heart disease, type 2 diabetes, certain cancers, and early death, even if you exercise regularly. Read that last part again. Even if you exercise regularly. That detail is what makes the whole thing a paradox. Because if you go to the gym for an hour, run on a treadmill, lift weights, get your heart rate up, sweat through your shirt, that should fix it, right? You moved, you burned calories, you did the thing, but study after study showed the same eerie result. People who exercised hard for an hour, then sat for the rest of the day, were still suffering most of the same metabolic damage as people who didn't exercise at all. Researchers were baffled. How could 1 hour of vigorous movement fail to undo 8, 10, sometimes 12 hours of stillness? There had to be something happening, something invisible, something biological. During those long hours of sitting, that intense exercise simply wasn't reaching. So a small group of physiologists started asking a different kind of question. Not, what does exercise do to the body? But the inverse, what does the body stop doing when we sit? And that question, that one strange inversion of the usual logic, is what led them deep into the calf, to a muscle so unassuming most people don't even know it has a name. Reach down and touch the back of your lower leg. You'll feel the bulge of your calf. That's mostly the gastrocnemius, the big showy muscle that gives runners and dancers those sculpted lines. But underneath it, hidden, flatter, quieter, there's another muscle. Most people have never heard its name spoken aloud. It's called the soleus. The name comes from the Latin word for solo, like the flat, slipper-shaped fish, because that's what it looks like. A flat, broad, unspectacular slab of tissue running from just below your knee down to your heel. It's not glamorous. It doesn't sprint. It doesn't jump. While your gastrocnemius is the explosive, fast-twitch sprinter of the calf, the soleus is something else entirely. Slow twitch, endurance-driven, almost meditative. Here's what it does. Every time you stand, every time you walk, every time you simply hold yourself upright against gravity, the soleus is quietly working. It's the muscle that keeps you from collapsing forward. It's the muscle that pumps blood from your legs back up towards your heart. It's the unsung porter of the human body, strong, patient, and perpetually overlooked. In fact, of all the muscles in your body, the soleus has one of the highest concentrations of slow-twitch, oxygen-loving fibers, the kind that can keep working hour after hour without fatigue. It's not built for power. It's built for forever. Now here's what makes this strange and beautiful. Throughout most of human history, the soleus was working almost constantly. Our ancestors stood, they walked, they squatted. They moved across landscapes for hours every day. The soleus was always on, but something changed. recently, drastically, and the soleus, this ancient, faithful muscle, went silent in a way it had never been silent before. What changed was us. Think about your day. You wake up. You sit to eat breakfast. You sit in your car or on the train. You sit at your desk. You sit through lunch. You sit through meetings. You sit through meetings. You sit through dinner. You sit on the couch to watch something. Then you lie down to sleep. The average modern adult, depending on the study, sits between 9 and 13 hours a day. 13 hours. Our great-grandparents would have found that incomprehensible. Even just 100 years ago, most labor, farming, manufacturing, housework, transportation required standing, walking, lifting. The chair, as a dominant piece of furniture in everyday life, is a remarkably new invention for most of humanity, and our bodies haven't caught up. When you sit, the soleus does almost nothing. The leg is bent. The foot is at rest. There's no gravity to push back against. The muscle that was designed for endurance, for forever, gets a kind of forced retirement, hour after hour, day after day. And here's where the researchers in Houston started to notice something extraordinary. When the soleus goes quiet, it's not just that you're not moving. Something deeper happens, something chemical. Your body has trillions of cells, and many of them have molecular machinery on their surfaces designed to pull glucose, that's sugar, out of your blood. To pull fat, specifically things called triglycerides, out of your blood. To clean things up. To keep your bloodstream steady and balanced. That machinery doesn't run by itself. It needs a signal. It needs muscles to be working, pulling fuel from the blood to keep the system humming. And the soleus, because of how massive its role is in standing and walking, is one of the body's biggest customers of blood sugar and blood fat. When the soleus stops working, that demand vanishes. Sugar lingers in the bloodstream. Fat lingers in the bloodstream. The cleanup crew clocks out. And this happens within minutes of sitting down. Not hours. Minutes. That's the first hint of the puzzle. But it gets stranger. Here's where the story gets interesting. A physiologist named Mark Hamilton, along with his collaborator Theodore Zarek, had spent years studying the metabolic effects of inactivity. They were the ones who helped establish that sitting was a unique, independent risk factor for disease. But they kept circling back to one question. Was there a way to keep the body's metabolic machinery on while a person was sitting? It seemed almost contradictory. The whole problem was that sitting shut things down. How could sitting also be the solution? So they designed a study, and what they found in 2022 made medical journals around the world take notice. They asked participants to sit in a chair. Just sit. But while sitting, they were taught a very specific, very subtle movement. Keep the toes on the ground. Lift the heel. Let it drop. Lift it again. Let it drop. Lift it again. Let it drop. A small, rhythmic flexing of the calf, with the foot still resting on the floor. It looks like the kind of fidget you might catch a nervous person doing in a waiting room. But there was a trick. They taught participants to do it in a way that specifically engaged the soleus, using its full range with the right rhythm, without letting the bigger calf muscles take over. They called it the soleus push-up. Then they took blood samples, lots of them, and what they saw was almost unbelievable. Participants doing this small, almost lazy movement for a few hours, while sitting, showed a 52% reduction in blood sugar spikes after eating a meal. Their need for insulin, the hormone that controls blood sugar, dropped by 60%, the amount of fat being burned for fuel, while they sat there, more than doubled. Let that sink in. Just by quietly bouncing one small muscle, while sitting in a chair, looking otherwise completely still. These people were showing metabolic numbers that, in some cases, rivaled or exceeded what you might see from intense exercise. Hamilton called the soleus metabolically unique. He said this little muscle, working slowly and steadily, could sustain elevated metabolism for hours, far longer than any other muscle in the body before fatigue set in. For comparison, if you tried to do squats or push-ups for hours straight, your muscles would be screaming and your nervous system would be cooked. But the soleus, built for forever, could just keep going. And here's the twist that makes this whole thing feel almost like a riddle. Doing this movement burned remarkably few calories. We're talking maybe 3 times the energy of just sitting still, but in absolute terms, a small amount. So the benefit wasn't coming from burning calories. It was coming from something else entirely, something stranger. something the researchers were still trying to fully understand. To understand why such a small movement could have such a massive effect, we have to zoom in, way in, past the skin, past the muscle fibers, all the way down to the molecular level. Inside your muscle cells are tiny doorways. They're called GLUT4 transporters. Think of them as little gates that, when opened, let glucose pour out of your blood and into your cells where it can be used for fuel. When you're sitting still, most of those gates are closed. But here's the magic. Muscle contractions, even gentle, repeated ones, pry those gates open. Not chemically, mechanically. The act of contracting actually shuffles those transporters to the surface of the cell. The soleus, with its abundance of slow-twitch fibers, has a huge number of these gates, and because it can contract steadily for hours without tiring, it can keep those gates open for hours. Now layer on something else. There's an enzyme in your blood called lipoprotein lipase, often shortened to LPL. Its job is to clear fat, those triglycerides, out of your bloodstream and shuttle them into tissues that can use them. Within hours of sitting down, LPL activity in your legs drops by up to 90%. 90%. That's why sitting is so quietly catastrophic. The system that pulls fat out of your blood basically goes on strike. But movement, even tiny, sustained movement, keeps LPL alive and working. So when the soleus is firing, two things happen at once. Your cells are pulling sugar out of your blood, and your blood vessels are clearing fat. The two great traffic jams of metabolic disease, high blood sugar and high blood fat, both ease at the same time. This, the researchers realized, is why 1 hour at the gym can't undo a day of sitting. Because exercise, as powerful as it is, ends. And then your soleus goes quiet again. The gates close, the enzymes shut down, the traffic jam returns. But the soleus push-up is different. It's not about intensity, it's about duration. It's about keeping a low, persistent flame burning all day long in a muscle that was literally built to burn that flame forever. It's not a workout. It's something older than workouts. It's a return, a small, quiet return, to the way our bodies were designed to spend their hours. Step back for a moment. For millions of years, our ancestors didn't exercise. There was no concept of going for a workout. They simply moved, walking long distances, standing while preparing food, squatting around fires, climbing, foraging. Their soleus muscles, like ours, anatomically, were on almost constantly throughout the day. Our metabolic systems weren't designed around bursts of intense activity followed by long stretches of stillness. They were designed around low, continuous engagement. Think of it like an old wood-burning stove. You don't keep a stove warm by lighting one giant bonfire in the morning and then letting the embers die for the next 20 hours. You keep it warm by feeding it small logs steadily throughout the day. Modern life flipped that model. We try to feed our metabolism with one big bonfire, that hour at the gym, and then leave the stove cold for the rest of the day. The soleus, in a sense, is the body's pilot light, the little flame that was always meant to be on. And when it goes out, the whole system runs cold. This reframes something profound. For decades, we've thought about health in terms of peaks. Peak heart rate, peak performance, peak burn. But what the soleus tells us is that maybe the deepest engine of long-term health isn't peaks at all, it's baseline. It's not what you do for an intense hour, it's what you do for the other 23. Now I want to be honest with you, because this story is so striking that it would be irresponsible not to pause here. The original study that catapulted the soleus push-up into headlines was small, only about 24 participants. The findings were dramatic, but science doesn't run on a single study. We need replication. We need long-term data. We need to see how this plays out across thousands of people, across years, across different bodies and conditions. Other researchers have urged caution. They've pointed out that we don't yet know whether years of soleus push-ups would actually translate into lower rates of heart disease, diabetes, or premature death. The metabolic markers look extraordinary, but markers aren't the same as outcomes. There's also a technique question. The soleus push-up isn't quite the same as just bouncing your foot mindlessly. The researchers used careful instruction and biofeedback to make sure participants were truly engaging the soleus, not just letting bigger muscles take over. A casual fidget in your chair might not produce the same effects. So this isn't a miracle cure. It isn't a replacement for cardiovascular exercise, strength training, sleep, or a reasonable diet. The body is still a vast interconnected system, and no single muscle, no matter how special, is going to do all the work. But, and this is a big but, even with all those caveats, what we've learned about the soleus is remarkable, because it suggests something we didn't take seriously enough before, that the texture of our days matters as much as the peaks, that the muscles working quietly in the background, while we're not paying attention, may be writing the long story of our health far more than the dramatic moments we celebrate. And it suggests that an answer to one of the great problems of modern life, the damage of all this sitting, might not be more discipline, more punishment, more hours sacrificed at the altar of fitness. It might be something much smaller, much gentler, something almost embarrassingly easy. Look down at your feet. Right now, as you watch this, your soleus is probably idle, patient, waiting. The same muscle that has stood with you, walked with you, supported you for every step of your life, is currently doing nothing, because you've asked nothing of it. Try this. Plant your toes on the ground. Let your heels lift, slowly. Then let them drop. Lift again. Drop. Find a rhythm. Slow, steady, almost meditative. That's it. That's the movement. You'll notice it's not hard. It doesn't burn. You could do this while reading, while working, while talking on the phone. You could do this for an hour and barely notice. But beneath the surface, in tissues you'll never see, something is changing. Gates are opening. Sugar is leaving your blood. Fat is being pulled out of circulation. Enzymes are firing. A muscle built for forever is finally doing what it was built to do. And here's the part that I find genuinely beautiful. We live in a culture obsessed with intensity, pushing harder, lifting heavier, running faster, optimizing more. We're told that the path to health is paved with sweat and suffering, but the soleus tells a different story. It says that maybe what your body has been waiting for all this time isn't more punishment. Maybe it's been waiting for something almost the opposite, a quiet, steady, almost imperceptible return to the rhythms it was designed for. Small movements, continuous engagement, the pilot light kept alive. The damage of modern life, the damage of all this sitting, might not require some heroic, dramatic intervention to repair. It might require something humbler, something more honest, something so small that you'd almost miss it if you weren't paying attention. A muscle in your calf, the size of a soul-shaped fish, gently lifting and falling beneath your skin, hour after hour, quietly, faithfully, the way it was always supposed to. We started with a paradox. How could an hour of intense exercise fail to undo a day of sitting? And the answer, hidden inside the calf, turned out to be this, because the body wasn't asking for an hour. It was asking for the whole day, not in volume, not in effort, but in presence. There's a kind of poetry in that, I think. Maybe the lesson of the soleus isn't really about a muscle at all. Maybe it's about how we live, about what we measure, what we miss, and what's been quietly working on our behalf the whole time, asking only to be remembered. So tonight, the next time you sit down at your desk, on a plane, in a waiting room, feel the back of your lower leg, plant your toes, lift your heels, let them fall. A tiny movement, almost invisible, but maybe, just maybe, one of the most important conversations your body has been waiting to have with you. And it only took a flat, slipper-shaped muscle, hidden under the surface, to remind us that the most powerful changes in our lives don't always come from doing more. Sometimes they come from finally noticing what was already there.